We have a lot happening in our region at the moment
Mm.
with China and the Solomons doing a deal. You both have a bit of a background in foreign policy. Dave, former ambassador to Israel. Are you concerned about the fact that the Solomons have signed up to this Beijing security pact, regardless of the support that's been forthcoming to them? Should the foreign minister have been deployed to try and stop this from eventuating?
Well, absolutely, I'm concerned. I mean, yes, I was a diplomat. My last position was ambassador to Israel, but my first posting was in Papua New Guinea. I did a stint in Bougainville when we had a peacekeeping force there, and I was actually also one of the people involved in sending our regional assistance mission to the Solomon Islands to help quell a civil war there in the early 2000s. Um, Now, I think this is very alarming, but it's indicative of more aggressive and expansionist behaviour by China in our region. China's behaviour has changed quite fundamentally over the past 2 decades. They're seeking to behave as a greater power. They're seeking to carve out a sphere of influence. They're seeking to create a hierarchy, if you like, in East Asia and the Western Pacific, in which countries have to have, in some senses, their decision making or their freedom of action subject to their veto. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges Australia faces as a nation, that some of the certainty and safety that we've come to expect in the post Second World War era is beginning to unravel around us.
Did
And
our
I think
government drop the ball by not
no, I
sending
mean, I
people
think,
in
look,
earlier?
I think it's easy to Monday morning quarterback this, but having worked on these issues for a number of years, I know that these are all sovereign countries. They've all got politicians who are driven by a whole range of motivations, sometimes proper, sometimes less proper, and but ultimately, as Australia, we respect their sovereignty. So we need to work very hard to remain Solomon Islands' partner of first choice. I think we need to encourage them to reconsider this deal. There's many Solomon Islands politicians and many neighbouring countries, Fiji, Tonga, and others, who are concerned about this deal. We need to work with our allies like the United States and Japan in the region because, look, unfortunately, this is the sort of world we're facing now. This isn't a one-off. We should expect more things like this,
Yep.
whether it's militarisation of the South China Sea, land reclamation activities there, or this sort of stuff.
Allegra Spender, your grandfather signed the ANZUS Treaty, Sir Percy Spender, and a commitment to obviously building that US alliance. Do you support the ongoing strengthening of the US alliance in the context of this instability now,
Mm.
this uncertainty we have in the region?
Look, I think it's very appropriate that Australia has alliances across the regions, and so I support the ANZUS alliance, obviously, the AUKUS, but also things like the Quad. I think these are really important alliances and discussions and groups that we are part of. I think very much, I am very concerned about what's just happened in the Solomon Islands, and I think that, while I absolutely agree from a point of view that this is indicative of China's change in terms of, and their aggression, I think we should be absolutely concerned about that. But it means that we actually need to step up in terms of what we're doing with our closest neighbours. And I do see it as of real concern that, firstly, we knew about this apparently since August, and we haven't sent a foreign minister to this, given how strategically important the Solomon Islands is to Australia. That we are not addressing climate change, which again is, I know it's a real issue for the communities in the Pacific. They say to Australia, they notice that we're not doing something about this. Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton, Tony Abbott made, laughed at a joke about waters lapping at the seas, but this is an existential risk for the people of the Pacific. And so Australia, we've been cutting foreign aid to the Pacific. So these are actions that we should be doing much, much better on. And those are some of the things that we should be thinking of in the future.
Dave?
Look, could I just respond to that briefly? Firstly, we're not cutting foreign aid to the Pacific. In the last budget, we announced $1.7 billion in foreign aid to the Pacific, which
But
is a
Tony
record
Abbott.
high number. Solomon Islands is our third largest recipient of foreign aid in the region. And this argument that Solomon Islands has partnered up with China because of climate change. I know Penny Wong has been pushing this as well. It's a furphy. I mean, China is the biggest emitter in the world. They've got about 40 times the coal-fired power stations of Australia. Solomon Islands isn't doing this because they're unhappy with our action or otherwise on climate change. Solomon Islands is doing this because, and Prime Minister Sogavari is doing this because he sees an opportunity here. And we need to be clear. If we're going to confront these challenges properly, we need to be clear on, and we don't need to engage in self-loathing or self-blame for some of these decisions. We just need to understand what's driving them and how to address them.